It's Lil Baby.
Welcome to episode 45 of Conversations with Chai. I'm your host, Ihram Chowdhury, aka Lil Baby Rama. Today I have with me Councilwoman. There's very few guests that my dad gets excited about, right? There's very few guests, but I have Councilwoman Shahana Hanif.
Thank you for having me on. And I love that. It's always wonderful to hear from my peers or first gen kids that their parents are excited about me.
My dad doesn't get excited for anybody I talk to. Like, I'm trying to explain who certain people are, right? But as soon as I mentioned that I was having you on, like, obviously he immediately knows who you are, right? And I'm just like, oh, okay. Like, and those are the episodes that I feel like a little bit more pressure around, because I was like, oh, these are the ones that my dad's gonna listen to. But no, appreciate you coming on. We were talking a bit earlier, but a big reason that I wanted to have you on, and I wanted to preface this entire conversation with, I love the fact that I always say that we complain about things, right? Like, we're always like, hey, we could do this better, but there's very few of us that get truly involved in our own respective avenues, right? And the biggest way to get involved, and it's the way that we least, I guess, care about in our generation is politically, right? I'm now coming around to my opinions on politics ends up being there's nothing's gonna ever change and nothing's gonna happen. But you are truly sitting at the table and truly legislating and truly making a difference in Brooklyn. And I think that's amazing. So that's a big reason I wanted to have you on. But I kind of wanted to start with what started that, right? Because I know you were working in politics, you were helping out in campaigns, and then you decided, hey, I'm going to run. So what does that decision look like?
Totally. Well, I'll just start by saying I never knew I would ever run for office. And I actually haven't worked on campaigns or hadn't worked on campaigns prior to deciding to run for office. And running for office really came at the tail end of already having worked many years in the community organizing and advocacy space. And I mean, there are several events in my life and within our community that have been catalysts as to how I ended up here. And the first is, I'm a kid who grew up post 9/11. I was 10 years old when 9/11 happened and experienced how a community like mine, now Little Bangladesh, Kensington, Brooklyn, which is the largest Bangladeshi Muslim, primarily working class community in Brooklyn, was impacted by the state surveillance apparatus. And our families were experiencing Islamophobia, whether that was at their workplace, whether it was at school, children getting bullied, and a lack of understanding of what our community stands for, and the needs of our communities in that particular moment, particularly when there were informants hired by the police department to infiltrate our mosques, our community centers. And so seeing that as a child immediately put me in the mindset of we're the warriors of our community. And by we, I mean it was myself, my middle sister, Sabia, and then the kids on the block, all Muslim kids, first generation. And then the second event is at 17, I was diagnosed with a degenerative chronic illness called lupus. And it was the first time that I had ever been in a hospital for 3 months straight in the intensive care unit. I was uninsured. I went in without really having a sense as to how to navigate the healthcare system. And it dawned on me that I knew no one in the Bangladeshi Muslim community, in my home community, about the experiences of illness, disability, that we didn't talk about. Being sick, getting sick. I didn't see my parents take a single day off if they were sick. And if we did have any medical issues, it was over-the-counter medication, and you went about your day. Or it was very hush-hush, especially if you had something that was autoimmune or chronic. And that scared me. It instilled a fear in me that, wait a minute, I might not survive this. On top of there being very limited resources to support my parents who are limited English proficient, speak Bangla, to understand what is lupus? How is my life going to change as a 17-year-old? How can they parent me? So those two incidences helped spark this desire to want to see a much more compassionate, caring city for girls like me, for families like mine, for communities like ours.
I think it's like tough because when I think about government, I really think that government should be representative of like the people, right? I know that's like an idealistic thing in this day and age, right? But it's hard because like, how do you, without being a part of that community, how do you govern said community? Because you're only able to address those issues and even identify those issues because you came from that community, right? Somebody who doesn't have that background, not that they couldn't govern it, but it would take a lot for them to truly understand the issues outside of like, hey, we're just going to campaign. And I think about like the area that you govern, right? It would be a shame. I'm so glad that, because you're the first Bangladeshi, first Muslim woman elected. And I'm like, how is that even, like I saw that in your bio and I was like, how? Like that area has been Bengali as hell for mad long. And it's like, but we need people within our community to represent us, right? Because there's such unique issues. And it's like, these random politicians that run in are not going to just know that, right? And I guess like now, like, hey, you decided to run, right? You obviously got an amazing amount of support from that community, right? Like you had a crazy mandate. I saw, what was it, like a 20%, 30% on election?
Yeah, it was a big turnout from the Bangladesh community. But you know, the challenge with this lack of representation is that communities like ours have been iced out of the political process, and that begins by the right to vote. Many of our community members, even though there's so many of us, are not registered to vote. So that already bars them from this political process. And then candidates, because we need people who will understand us and who will reliably come out to vote. Usually the tendency is for politicians to go to those who have already voted, because they don't want to spend more money on needing to convince you to come out to vote. And so this has caused a ripple effect of disenfranchising many, many communities, and ours is among them. And so for my election, there were two Bangladeshi candidates. It was a very crowded race. And while I represent such a huge Bangladeshi constituency, their vote alone would have never helped me win. Their vote, though, was necessary to help distinguish me and put me over the finish line. However, because this is a community that had not voted, we inconsistently vote in general elections and primaries. The predecessor who was in office prior to me had been in office for 3 terms. So many of them had not even voted for him. He was just there already. Yeah. Because this is a constituency that you don't need to turn out. Because the rest of my district includes some of the highest voter engaged constituencies. I have Park Slope, I have Carroll Gardens, I have Cobble Hill, I have Windsor Terrace, I have Gowanus and Borum Hill. And every general election, every primary, when we do the debrief to see how voter turnout was, my district consistently is among the highest in terms of voter turnout, which means it's a very civically engaged district overall. So I had to actually get to the faces of as many people outside of the Kensington community while also devising a plan to make sure that our people did turn out. This was going to impact the history. It has had an impact on the history of New York City governance. But it took so much effort. But, you know, I'm the first woman to represent the district as well. And I'm a woman of color. The previous elected officials that represented my district in the city council were white men from Park Slope. And that should not be a surprise, right? So I had to actually get in front of a lot of white, more affluent people and prove to them that I was capable, and I had to change perception of what leadership looks like, because in a community and in a city where you're used to seeing men holding these positions, you have this internal bias. You're automatically thinking, even if you don't think that about me, you think she's not smart enough to do this. So it was a hard, tough race to win, but I'd certainly focus on the Bangladeshi constituency because they're my roots.
No, I think like even what you're saying about like changing those perceptions, right? Like you just even like looking different, right? Like as educated, as smart, right? As like proficient you are in this, right? You have to then prove that, right? Because the assumption is when you're not that, right? When you're a white male, is that you just show up and it's like whatever your credentials are, it's like, oh, like
right.
Of course they could govern
right.
this, right? But it's like you have to beat that prior disposition of like, is she going to be able to govern this area? So like what was kind of like the plan, I guess in twofold, right? One is how are you going to these other demographics and being like, hey, like I'm for real, right? Like I'm gonna do a good job, but while also, hey, how do we get all of these Bangladeshis that historically haven't voted to vote?
Yeah, absolutely. And so my power was in relationships. I came with a track record. So I wasn't just somebody who woke up one day and said, I'm going to do this. Because there are candidates who say, this candidate is doing it all wrong, or this elected is doing it all wrong, so I'm going to run. I didn't want to make such a big decision based on issues that are not aligned with how I would lead. So I was formerly a tenant organizer, and I used to organize Bangladeshi tenants in public housing campuses across the city. And that had laid the foundations for me to understand the lived experiences of working class families that, of course, I saw in my own community, but public housing residents are experiencing a tirade of issues and violations that really are that leave out their dignity. So that was one. And then I had an opportunity to work with my predecessor. After Trump got into office, I wanted to do my organizing directly in my community because the xenophobic mandates that Trump had passed were impacting our people block by block. People were afraid that they were going to get deported. The xenophobic narrative, including the Muslim ban, really put pressure on our neighborhoods because we were being vilified by who was supposed to be the leader of our nation. And I wanted to make sure that we were building power, that we were organizing, and that we weren't just coming together when there would be an incident of hate violence, that we were unified in calling out these kinds of rhetoric from our top leaders while also demanding more. We needed legal services. We wanted to make sure that people were on the path to apply for citizenship, that people had the tools in their schools if a child was getting bullied on how to respond, that our cultural programming was adequate. And as I was doing that work, I was also writing and performing. I mean, I was really involved in the Muslim organizing spaces. I had co-founded the Muslim Writers Collective. I love to perform and do prose poetry. And so all of that really energized me and gave me a skill set that eventually, as my predecessor's term was coming to an end, many leaders in my community, many of these like arts educators, organizational executive directors, civic leaders were like, Shahana, we think you should do this. Like, how about you think about doing this? And it shocked me because I would have never thought, since growing up, it's not like your parents tell you you should become an elected official. And especially for women, nobody's telling us like, you should be the CEO one day. And so to hear words that were really holding me to a standard that I had not even thought about by myself really humbled me. And so I started looking into, what were the resources available on how to run. I knew nothing about running for office, and it's a different arena to run. And I did a training with a group called New American Leaders. They train first generation Americans to run for office across all levels of government. And that helped me really create a campaign that was authentically me.
I think it's like a important thing to like note that like when we hear all of these like national like policies, right, like the Muslim ban and those things, I think it's really easy to forget that it does impact real people at
That's
the
right.
like local like level, right? Like I always say like these like national politics and national like how even national politics is covered from like a media perspective, it's just so like generalized, but you forget at the end of it is that there's real people that are affected, right? Like you're seeing it
Totally.
in your community. And I think that that's where we probably care like the least in terms of like, because it's less sexy in terms of like local politics, but it really is that, right? Like I'm just imagining a Bengali family like who's actually fearful of being deported, right? And not having legal services. Like the difference between like
Right.
their ability and survival in this country is dependent on that. Because
Totally.
how else am I figuring it out, right? Like I always think about how many of us came, didn't speak the language, right? Like how many of our parents came and didn't speak the language. It's like, these things are happening at scale so above you, but they are affecting you, right? Like you're sitting there thinking like, damn, like, oh, this is happening, like Trump is in office, right? But the main thing that you care about is my family going to be okay? Am I going to be okay? And then who do we look to? We look to our community. And for the longest time, we really haven't been able to look towards our community leaders outside of like leadership in the sense of like whoever you knew that had gone through the process.
That's
right. But we couldn't really go towards our government, which is why they're there. Right. And so I guess like my thinking now is that what are kind of like the issues that you are focused in for the next like 5 years, right? What are those like issues? Because now we're at a different impasse, I would say, like generationally, right? Like we have a generation that's now solidified here, right? Bangladeshis have like come in droves. We have like truly established ourselves in New York, right? Now we have like second gens who are like now have real jobs, real careers, right? Like have truly advanced our people. So what are the issues that are kind of facing Brooklyn, but also just facing New York as a whole as we kind of change like demographically?
Totally. So the way I legislate is thinking about its impact on working class New Yorkers. And that's really the essence of why I wanted to run. And while I applaud all of the accolades that our community is experiencing, and to see our um, uh, community flourish and succeed, and my peers like reach all of these high places, what still remains true for a working class community like Kensington is, and this is not specifically to just Kensington, but we have an administration, the mayor, who is peeling away protections for New Yorkers. We have gone from 7-day library services to 6 days, and we are now at risk of cutting another day, which would bring us down to 5 days. Libraries are our default community centers. They are where we don't just go to read. That's where, for the family who won't be home, the parents who won't be home until 5, 6 o'clock, the kids are waiting and doing activities and programming. The people who just recently arrived are taking English classes, learning digital literacy. It is a hub and plethora of social services, alongside, of course, access to free literature. And that is a resource being taken away from us. That has devastating impact. That's one. Cuts to education. Our public school infrastructure here is being peeled away piece by piece. Some schools don't have social workers. Some schools don't have a librarian. They don't have the necessities needed to run a school community that is delivering to the students of a particular neighborhood. And those are cuts that have been coming down the pike over the last 2 budget cycles that I've been a part of. Our rents are going up drastically. And, I talked about public housing, which is among the most affordable housing that's still left. And then the second most affordable housing are those that are rent stabilized units. The Rent Guidelines Board just passed a mandate to increase 1-year leases by 2.5%, 2-year leases by 5.2%. That is going to have a drastic impact on people who are running this city, whose incomes are not $150,000, $200,000, right? The common New Yorker, the working New Yorker, is feeling this devastation. And so my fight has been around really pushing back against austerity and bringing in the social services we need. So I have a dedicated Bangladeshi organizer who sits in an office in Kensington to ensure that we're hearing from our constituents, and these are the issues that come up alongside domestic violence and of course mental health issues, and so a part of it has been to bring in organizations into the community and find them. We have a massive need though, because a lot of us don't speak Bangla, and then a lot of us who might speak Bangla don't speak English. So there's this language barrier. So all of these issues are concerns that impact every single New Yorker.
So what is that? So I hear you and I absolutely see it, right? What, because you're saying hey, I'm intaking the feedback and the issues that are relevant to the true people of New York, right? Mm-hmm. So what is it that the other, I guess, legislators are not seeing, right? What is causing that away? Because all the things that you're mentioning, I feel if you ask anybody, it's a common sense piece of information, right? We see it, right? We see literacy rates dropping.
That's right.
Right? We see homelessness getting rampant. So what is it where is the disconnect that these things are being stripped away at a time where I would say we probably need it the most?
That's right. So, I mean, at the basic level, as New Yorkers, it's critical to be civically engaged. And this is why, I really wanted to flesh out what being disenfranchised means. Because while we're acknowledging that homelessness is on the rise or that rents are increasing, I don't make the decision on lowering your rent. My job as a council member is being the bully pulpit to the mayor. We're the legislative branch. He's the executive branch. So in New York City, the mayor has full control over these decisions around budget. The city council and the mayor work together to come to an agreement around a budget. So we've been, from January through June, this week, we're going to be voting on our city's budget for the next fiscal year, how much money will be allocated across all of these various services. And there are cuts. And we talked about the cuts to housing, cuts to libraries, cuts to early childhood education. So it's on the mayor. It's on us to elect a mayor who is speaking to the needs of your common New Yorker. He appoints those members of the Rent Guidelines Board. And he has decided to put real estate, the real estate lobby. So the people who are on that board do not empathize with the mother of 3 who is a single mom, who is a street vendor in one of our train stations saying I can't live here. I can't, where would I go? So in those moments, I have to show up. So I go to the Rent Guidelines Board public hearings and I speak on behalf of my constituents. I'm also part of the Progressive Caucus, and we share out our agenda for the needs of working New Yorkers. And that includes everything we just talked about and more. As first and second generation kids growing up here, we're we're about to be in families, or many of us are in families where we have two working parents, and we're leaving our children with our grandparents, right? Because of the affordability crisis in childcare programs. That's a huge, huge need. And this mayor, again, has made substantial cuts and has hindered us from moving towards universal childcare. So why I bring up the civic engagement part is because our community did not elect Mayor Adams. And a lot of people didn't even vote during that cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And this mayor has critically divested from our social safety net infrastructure. It is the council's job to have hearings to better understand his operations and where money is going. But we have been fighting with an administration that has not been transparent to us, the co-equal branch of government. And of course, he has not been transparent with communities. Instead, he has taken on a narrative that there are asylum seekers coming into our city. So that's why, I can't put money towards education. I can't put money towards libraries. And he's pitting us against immigrants. And we're seeing the effect that that's having, because we've been in this cycle of disinvestment for years.
I think the unique part as like a regular constituent is, I think the education piece, right? Holding down that narrative, right? That's a narrative that I hear pretty frequently, right? Asylum seekers, like that's why the city's going to shit, right? Like those are the things that I honestly hear. And I'm like, I'm just, again, not like super politically savvy. So I'm definitely not educated enough to, but
it's working though, right? That narrative that
that's what
shared.
I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
I think a big part of it is narrative building, right? Like when you talk about like what the narratives are, right? Even like the opposition to Adams is not based off of, it should be based off of what is he actually doing in office. Part of it is based off of that, but a lot of it is based off of the other shit, right? Seeing you out at New York City clubs, like that's where like the masses pay attention to, right? Things like that. Where we lose it is the education piece, right? Where it is like, what are the true policies and how have they negatively impacted me? Or how have they negatively impacted my mom? Or how have they negatively impacted my cousin or whoever in your family? I think that's the part that we lose like sight of by, again, not being politically engaged, right? Or civically engaged, right? It's like we don't even know the things that are being torn away around us. We look up and we're like, oh, wait, why is it shit here? And it's like, oh, it's been slowly being shredded away piece by piece
100%.
Every budget cycle that we don't, again,
100%.
we didn't even know.
I mean, I had no idea either, right? I'm only thinking, and I'm talking about before becoming a council member, my focus was I want to make sure that there are arts organizations in Kensington, because I was a writer, and I know that arts is such a big unifier, and not seeing my school have consistent after school programming as a young adult made me realize like we need to have these programs outside of our school community. So I was very focused on like such a niche part of it, right? Like, because I think the common person is like passionate about something and like they're pursuing that. So for me, it was the arts, and it was, making sure the kids in the community have access to free enrichment programs, that they can pursue the arts as a career, and that like our parents felt safe sending those kids to those spaces where like they see me as the adult in that room, right? So when you're doing that work, you're not thinking like, oh, the mayor has cut, this program or whatever. So it's certainly complex. And like what I want to share is that that's done by purpose. Like it is supposed to be so complicated for the common person to enter into the political strata. And that's a big challenge too. So like, as much as I like, say that we need to be civically engaged, I also have to say that the system's been created to keep us out, to keep us in a gridlock, that we can't, like we have to be so well-read educated and like I have access to, social media or in a robust set of information to like really be in the know. And during my time in office, I really tried to make it more accessible for particularly communities like mine to know that every single person has access to their council member. There's no reason why you can't go visit your council member to be like, hey, like, do you care about, do you care that there's an uptick in hate incidences in this stretch of the community?
It's tough, right? Because I think like my dad is like somebody who's just like comes from that cloth, but like his generation, and I would say like that generation is a little bit more like political, like I guess they have a little bit more faith in the system to even reach out to their local councilman. Like I remember my dad sending like letters to like our rep, right? But I think our generation is one that's so disillusioned by the political system that we are just like, you know what, like this is going to be fucked regardless, and I just have to figure out how to survive within these parameters, right? It's unfortunate, right? Because like we feel it too, right? Like we feel high rent prices, right? Like
Absolutely.
We feel like our wages being diminished, right? We feel all of those things, but our solutions are so like, I just need to survive, right? Like, I don't know if I reach out to whoever, if it will make a difference. But in the immediate, I just need to figure out how to make it to the next month, the next year. And it's like, how do you change that perception of politics for an entire generation that's grown up and seen the underbelly of the political system, has seen the things that they've cared about stripped away?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And, government is just one tool of many imperfect tools to transform the lives of the people in this city. Because you've got nonprofits, you've got the private sectors, like there's an ample amount of work that is consuming us that either could orient us to being in complete survivor mode and saying like, I'm on my own on this, or you might turn to the private sector that might be doing some work around the issue you care about or something. Like artists coming together to support a ceasefire. Like, you're not necessarily needing to push the government to do that. You're sort of self-organizing and coming together with your community. So the government is just one tool of making change. I think it's very critical to be able to recognize that in this city, there are levers making decisions. And if you are not going to be a part of it, or if you are choosing to be disillusioned, decisions will be made on your behalf and money will be getting spent. And these are also tax dollars. This is your money.
This is, and this is where I kind of don't want to like say push back, but this is where my, I guess like fears and questions start raising up, right? Like I think that government obviously is such, I understand that there's other avenues that we all take to ensure that we survive, right? And we all try to do good in our corners of the world, right? But it's interesting because like government has been expanded to such a certain point where it is, listen, my tax dollars are being taken away regardless, right? Where it's being spent, I have an impact on, but in the immediate, I'm still losing a certain amount of my like wealth, what have you, right? And it's like in the process of like, hey, I need to survive. It's hard for somebody to care about that thing, right? Like even like think of like our community, right? They're just thinking about like their family. How do I make it to the next month? So how do we get people to change a government system that's already so entrenched in our everyday lives? I understand that those changes come slow
it's slow,
steady.
Right? Because, I was born and raised here. I didn't understand about the political facets of our government until I literally started working with an elected official. All my work has always been political. Like I deeply care about the needs of the Muslim community. I deeply care that Our young people have access to arts and music and a curriculum that is advancing their intellect and for them to be successful. So I like my job as council member right now is not to force everybody to come and, come to this camp, but for me to demonstrate a kind of governance and leadership style that shows to them that like, I got your back. And, and it's still hard though. New York City has the largest local government. We are 51 council members. And so that means that that's a lot of money across this entire city being spent to support our specific jurisdictions. But you notice that of the 51, there's only 2 South Asians. In a city that has the largest Bangladeshi enclave, the fastest growing Asian community, and there are only 2 2 South Asians in the seat, 1 Bangladeshi. It is a tough task to be the only one. Of a city that has more than 1 million Muslims in this city, deeply impacted by what's happening right now in Gaza to Palestinians, deeply impacted by the impacts of post 9/11 and countless other issues that impact us, including housing and everything else. There are right now 2 Muslims in the council. That's myself and a recently elected Black Muslim council member from Harlem, Dr. Yusuf Salam. 2 Muslims. So I like really recognize where we're at in terms of we are not even at those tables, and having so few of us makes this feat even more challenging to really to again just demonstrate like there's some of us who are in this work to do good by our communities, to really do justice, because so many administration after administration has failed us or just completely barred us and iced us out. So like right now, as I speak to young people, of course, like I'm never telling them to become an elected official. It's just so hard, first of all, to run for office. And the job is so hard. It is so hard because I'm not just talking about all of these issues that I, mentioned to you, but I also have to think about animal rights and all of these thousands of issues. And it's set up in a way where, you're going to fail because you're entrenched in this corrupt political system, right? So it is already so hard. And so like my advice to young people, as like I navigate, because I go to so many schools, I speak to so many young people, is to really be rooted in really understanding how you relate to your community. And, the thing that you just described about like that survivor mode, like this capitalism and what is it called? Like the eating up so much information has really driven us away from people. How do we really bring back our spaces of gathering? Which is why like I, again, bring up the arts all the time, because the arts have been a tested space where people are constantly coming together.
I think that I think we're building those spaces. That's right. I think that those spaces are being built like within our community, right? Like I have no questions in that, right? I see it all around me. I'm like so in that community, right? I see the people building those things, right? But my pause there is like you said, hey, like I'm not encouraging somebody to go because it is hard, right? But I would say that somebody taking that difficult task, because even this stuff is like hard, right? But somebody taking that difficult task, and not just one somebody, right? Not one Shahana, but like a bunch, 100%, right? Is how we truly get that change. And I would say somebody with now a seat at the table, right? It's how do we, because I always look at it like this, right? I think South Asians as a demographic, right, have now real socioeconomic power, right? There's real socioeconomic power there. There's a lot of us, right? So what is the path now to get that where we are not 2 South Asians on the entire council, right? What is that path? Because now I see it, like, because for the longest time we didn't have the money, we didn't have the numbers, right? But now we do. So what is the path now for us to get to those tables? Because I always say like those decisions, right? Like it's amazing to build communities, right? Because that is our everyday. But like you said, like those decisions are being made around us and we have very little say. But that's a fallacy in itself, right? We do actually have a pretty big say with just numbers as a block, right? And many of us, like you said, like things like Gaza, right? Like things like post 9/11, right? We're all kind of on the same page on a lot of those issues because they're our issues. So what is that path now forward so we can get a bunch more of us into those tables, into those seats?
So, you know, one of the reasons why I won is because of the coalition I built. And, you know, unless the entire district was made up of Bangladeshis, um, again, it would be hard for me. I would not have won just with the limited votes that came from the community I grew up in. So that meant that I had to build across a cross coalition of people, and so for me, leaning on the issues I care about determined which of the groups and or broader organizations or civic associations or community leaders I was getting to know to then meet with their blocks or their members. I ran on a set of principles rooted in climate justice, in housing dignity, in immigrant protection, in workers' rights, in cultivating the arts. And so from all of those issue areas, I was connecting with people across my district to make those connections, because you need a multiracial, cross-class coalition in order to really win. And for me, it's important that my elected leaders are meeting with different stakeholders. And so for the young person right now, or for anybody thinking about building political power, you have to build within your own community, but you also have to build outside of your community. And that means honing in and sharpening your understanding of, and for me, it's taking progressive stances on these issue areas, and meeting with those folks who identify with your vision and cultivating that vision. For my team, you know, I hired Bangladeshi folks, graduated from CUNY. I'm a CUNY student. I went to Brooklyn College. CUNY is a public institution in our city, and I, go hard for all of our public institutions as a municipal leader. But bringing in the Bangladeshi voice on my team was important, because it also matters that I'm not just simply cultivating the next generation of leaders who are going to run for office, but who are going to also be representing the constituents as staff members. We need the next generation of policy leaders who are going to go on to becoming your legislative director, education equity experts who are going to go on to understanding the issues of educators, students, and school communities. The person who's going to be your political communicator, right? Like my newsletter, my tweets, my captions, how to write for a political candidate and for the legislator. I'd love to see our community exploring those skill sets, which is why the only advice I give is read more, write more, because we need those tools. And then you pick, if your area is communications, you like making TikToks, I'll invite you into my office. If you want to think about, how do we solve the homelessness issue? How do we support survivors of domestic violence? How do we ensure that day laborers are getting paid more and not harassed? That means you might have a policy brain. You could go on to becoming my legislative director, right? So this is a multifaceted arena where I see, it's so nascent, like how we're seeing so many of our peers emerging in these talents. So it's very nascent, and it's definitely daunting to be like the only one right now, right? But seeing that for 400 years of this government not having had us even as staff in the offices is pretty shocking.
I think that's why what you've done is incredible, right? Because I always say the first person through the door, that's the hardest, right? That truly is the hardest, right? Because it's again, not having real infrastructure, not having somebody who's already done it to like look
There's
up
no
and be-
blueprint.
there's no blueprint, right? But now coming like from a very practical sense, right? You're already at this table, right? So like you can do very practical things like, hey, be my legislative director, right?
That's right.
Be my communications director. But on a larger than life level, right? It's like, hey, this is how Shahana did it from our community. Now there might be 3
That's right.
Bangladeshi girls in Kensington right now being like, yo, you know what? In 3 years, I can run.
I mean,
right?
I co-founded the Bangladeshi Americans for Political Progress, which is incubating the next generation of leaders who are either interested in these issue areas or want to support campaigns. So right now, they've been supporting Jamal Bowman, whose election is very consequential. Today's the day we're going to find out the results. But founding this club was important so that I'm able to really make sure that our community is building side by side, that we're not just picking out random individuals, but that there's an organized apparatus to really allow our people, not just our parents, but like people my age, right? I'm not that old. I just turned 33 this year. And in this council, that's very young for your elected official to be in their 30s. And to have my peers lead BOP is very critical. And like some of my homies, like right now are chairing and leading the organization. And, since my taking office, it has become even more urgent that spaces like those exist so that people could plug in. Like when they want to get involved, it's not going to be that I can offer them a job, right? Like we need to also encourage them to join some of the spaces that are existing or are emerging as a result of those of us who are breaking the wall or entering into this new era for our communities.
I think it's like important, like even you saying like, hey, like you're only 33, right? That's like important, right? Because for a lot of us, it's like politics is this like old white profession, right? But it's like, and because we hold that, we can never see ourselves in those places, right? And that in itself is a disservice because it's like, how could we ever change that if it's like something that's not even reserved for us, right? Like,
spot on.
Right? I would say like it's crazy. Like I'm 27 and I think like I look at most of my friends and none of us are really, like very few of us are any type of politically engaged, right? Because we look at that as like, oh, like that's for like the adults, right? Like at 27,
Right.
it's like at 27, like, oh, that's for the adults, right? But it's only because we look up at everybody who's governing and we're like, these people have no idea. Like I always like look like sometimes I'll like catch clips of like people doing like hearings on like Facebook and TikTok, right? And I'm like, wow, these people have no idea like what's going on, right? Like they have no idea like who it's affecting, like how it's affecting, right? Because they're so far removed from it, right? Like when we say like, hey, government is supposed to be representative of the people, what do I have in common with a 65-year-old white male who's like probably worth like 10, 15 million?
It's a good point.
They have no idea of what we're going through. And now bringing it back to New York, right? This is going to sound like a random question, right? Because I hear a lot of people saying that New York's best years are behind it, right? And I can't accept that,
Yeah.
right? Because I don't know, I just can't accept it, right? Because people are like, yo, just flee the state, like go somewhere else, go anywhere else, right? Anytime you talk to anybody outside of New York, they're like, damn, you do that? Like you pay like $2,000 to like,
Right.
a little box, right? And like everybody who's here is so protective of it, right? But I'm gonna ask you, right? Like, what is that path? Because I don't want to say that New York is ever done or finished, right? Like that's just not an attitude that we can hold, right?
No,
like I'm gonna be here, I'm gonna die on this island, right? So like, what is that path forward for us to change a lot of those things, right? The homelessness issue, right? Like our infrastructure is honestly awful, right? Like how do we get there, right? Like what does that path look like for you?
Well, I've picked, the legislative route, and right now, I'm about to wrap up my second term, and I'm going into my final four-year term, which means I have until the next couple years to really advance what I think are going to be transformative for the city. But of course, there's a lot of politics, and you have to be a strong advocate as you navigate negotiations and the political strata. But for me, what I continue to root myself in is that I love the city. I was raised by a community that worked so hard to make it here, who will not move back to Bangladesh. This is their home. This is our home. And I recognize all of these obstacles, but it's important to me that we lead with compassion and care and find the opportunities that allow our community to share their despairs, to be able to express their questions and their opinions. And so, right now I'm in the city council. I'm a legislator. I'm not going to always be a legislator, but I believe in the power of local laws because they have direct impact on New Yorkers. I also believe in the art of public speaking. I'm so lucky and I feel blessed that I get to speak in Bangla. Like, I went back to Bangladesh in 2016 and spent 7 months there to learn how to read and write because I recognized the language inaccessibility issues here, and that it was literally leaving our communities out of hospitals, of understanding what's happening to their kid in their schools. That you don't need the government's help. You really need to, it's just literally breaking the barrier. Coming into this work now, knowing how to read and write in Bangla and speak in Bangla, and speaking to the masses, which is why I always feel so much pride when my Bangladeshi aunties and uncles are like, they understand what I'm saying because, I want to make sure they understand what the city is doing to us. We all have a role to play, and it's up to us to determine how we will contribute to the city. But every New Yorker I know loves this city. They want to make sure that they can live in this city. And we have so many leaders who are coming out to make sure that we've got vibrancy in the arts, we've got vibrancy in politics, we've got vibrancy in like the education space. To see so many Bangladeshis go on to becoming educators right now is amazing. And that in and of itself is going to be transformative for the health of the city. So I'm positive, I'm hopeful. I don't plan on leaving the city, and I don't plan on being quiet. And I think it's imperative, and it's on us to take responsibility for the city that we love, and we got to reflect. How do we want to give back to the city?
I think that's like an important thing for everyone who's like listening to really know, right? That it really is like, it's a lot of people making their own small contributions at whatever level that they're at, right? Like, we always like forget those parts, right? Like, I always think about like just every single person who makes up like the fabric of the city, right? How do they just continuously, like we said, like survive, but how do they even contribute to like the daily infrastructure of that day, of that week, right? Because it's done on such an individual level, right? And that's why I have like a lot of faith in it, because I think there's too many people that care.
You're right, exactly.
There's just too many people that care in their own ways,
That's
right?
right.
Like, I think about like everybody around me that I talk to, that I'm just like, oh, like you have this like insane business, but your goal and objective with this business was not, hey, let's just make some money, right?
That's
like,
right.
It's, hey, I want to create a space for our community. Hey, I want to advance it so I could get a seat at that table, right? Like, those are things that are happening every day, right? And I think we overlook that. We always like, again, not that we have to like put our hands up and say like, oh, if my government screws me, they screw me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's all of us putting in that individual effort that then comes in as a collective effort into a more positive direction, I hope.
You're so right. I mean, and you know, it's human nature to focus more on the what's wrong or what's missing or the negative, but the way you just lifted up that like we know so many around us already that care so deeply about making sure that people are fed, people are housed, that people have access to various social services, and so much more, so much more. And they're imaginative, they're creative, they're using, tools at their disposal in countless ways. You've got this podcast. People have the innovations on TikTok. People are becoming educators, writers. I mean, there's so much that we are doing for our city. It's not pushed by individual self-interest. It's pushed because we care. And really spreading that message is critical, because that's who I surround myself with, right? Like, to know that, of course, there are hard days, and there are some days that I am so let down by my colleagues, or I'm let down that, like, damn, I didn't do this right, or like I messed up. But I'm able to get back up because I know that I have a clarion of people who have my back, who support me, who want me here, and who I support too, who want us all to succeed.
Nah, the city is built by immigrants, and immigrants have this weird thing where we really care about like
That's
our
right.
communities, right? Like we come, like that's such a part of our culture that like I like think about like even like Bangladeshis, right? The Bangladeshis help like a random Bangladeshi that they have no idea who that person is, just off of the strength that they're Bangladeshi, but we carry that into the culture of New York, right? Like it's like small. I think about the small things, right? Like random strangers helping like somebody carry up their like stroller up the stairs, right? It's small like little investments like that give me hope that like we all just care too much, not just about the city as a concept, but truly about the city and the people that make up the city, the infrastructure that is the city, right? We just care too much. I think we're wrapping up, Shahana, but I wanted to first of all say thank you for everything. First of all, doing this, but for everything that you've done, because I know, like you said it, like it definitely was not easy. I'm sure like the day-to-days are not easy, right? But it's that type of hard work that's going to lead a better path forward, right? Because the better path is not one that's easy, right? Going with the status quo and just accepting defeat is the easy thing, right? But not going quietly into that is one of the highest acts of human service that we can do. I end every podcast with a segment called Call Your Shot. It's essentially like goal setting, something that you see for maybe yourself personally, professionally, maybe for the city in the next 3, 5, 10, whatever years that you feel comfortable sharing. The idea being you say it up here, and then I can send it back in a little bit and say like, yo, look, you did it. But trying to call your shot.
Ooh, damn. I'm gonna just put this in the ethos right now. I have aspirations to run for higher office.
Amazing. I'd love to hear that. I was going to ask you that. I like didn't want to ask you. I'm so glad you volunteered that, because I was going to ask. I was like, I'm not going to like put that on her right now and be like, yo, are you running for higher office? So I'm so glad you put that out there, because otherwise the conversation after this was going to be, hey, we need you to run for higher office. Because I think that it's so important, right? Because it's like aspirations like that, right, is what pushes our community forward, right? Like the people, it's hard, right? But the dreamers, the ones that push on the edges of this and the edges of everything, are the people who are truly blazing a path forward for not just, again, yourself, but for an army behind you.
That's right.
Thank you for doing this
great.
again.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So proud of you.
Thank you. Appreciate y'all listening. Peace. Thank you.
Thank you.